Hi, everybody can hear? Hello, my name's Eduardo Cadava. In addition to being a professor in the English department, I'm also presently the Master of Wilson College. And on behalf of the college, I'd like to welcome you to the second lecture in Wilson College's signature lecture series. For those of you who are unable to attend Cornell West's inaugural and I would say magisterial lecture, I've inaugurated this series as part of the 50th anniversary celebration of the opening of Wilcox Hall and the Wilson Quad in 1960. We're very honored that Slavoj Zizek has agreed to be our second speaker in the series, and I thank you all for being here with us today. I also hope that you'll come to hear the other speakers in this series, Toni Morrison on March 1st, and I'm delighted to see that she's with us today, and Judith Butler at the end of March. In celebrating the early years of Wilson's founding, we're celebrating the students who founded the Wilson Society and the Wilson Lodge, the early templates for Wilson College and therefore for Princeton's residential college system, and who did so as part of a stance against privilege and exclusion, as part of a desire to create a place on campus where students could be who they were and which would bring together faculty and students as we are doing today. I'm very pleased that Slavoj is our second speaker, since like Cornell's, his writings also are devoted to exposing problems of inequality, exploitation, and injustice, and are written in relation to the promise of emancipation and political struggle, to the promise of a more just and less exclusionary world. Slavoj burst onto the American scene in 1989 with 3 books in 3 years: The Sublime Object of Ideology, 1989, For They Know Not What They Do, 1991, and Looking Awry, 1991. Initially called The Giant of Ljubljana, this tag has long since been set aside, abandoned, and so on, since, as has been noted, Slavoj and his thinking can never be localized. Working across the fields of philosophy, psychoanalysis, religion, political theory, history, film and media studies, and cultural studies, he has since 1991 written more than 35 books in English alone, all of which have been translated into several languages. He is presently senior researcher at the Institute for Sociology at the University of Ljubljana, the international director of the Birkbeck Institute for the Humanities at Birkbeck, University of London, on the faculty of the European Graduate School in Switzerland, and this month a visiting global scholar at New York University. A dozen critical introductions to his work have been written in English. A film, Zizek, was made about him and the impact of his philosophical work. Another, The Pervert's Guide to Cinema, was made about his theories of film. And he appears in Astor Taylor's film, The Examined Life, in which Cornell West and Peter Singer also appear. He's written on innumerable topics, including subjectivity, ideology, capitalism, fundamentalism, racism, tolerance, political correctness, multiculturalism, I'm going to give you a list, multiculturalism, human rights, ecology, globalization, the Iraq War, revolution, totalitarianism, postmodernism, popular culture, opera, cinema, political theology, and religion. He's been a regular contributor to the London Review of Books and the New York Times, and he's examined the psychological motivations behind the failed U.S. search for weapons of mass destruction during the Iraq War for foreign policy. In Welcome to the Desert of the Real, 2002, and Iraq, the Borrowed Kettle, 2004, he not only criticizes the rationale for war, but he also explores the psychological factors involved in the restrictions placed on American civil liberties after the September 11 attacks. His newest books, In Defense of Lost Causes, in which he discusses the Christian legacy, class struggle, and problems in the world of theory itself. First is Tragedy, Then is Farce, in which he analyzes the recent financial crisis and what for him is the irrationality of global capitalism. And Living in End Times, in which he suggests that global capitalism is nearing its terminal crisis, again display the range of his interests, a range that has led one New Yorker critic to claim that Zizek leaves no social or cultural phenomena untheorized. This list does not explain why. He's also sort of the living embodiment of the truism that there's no such thing as a low-grade obsession. This list does not explain why he has earned the international reputation and respect he enjoys, however. But since we're all eager to hear his lecture today, I will only say that from my perspective, his force can be attributed not only to the way in which he reads Lacan and psychoanalysis as a means of cultural and political analysis, to his use of film and film theory to illuminate some of the most pressing issues of our time, or to his use of Marx as a lever into the major contemporary debates of our day. His critical strength comes from his capacity to weave these fields of interest with philosophy and to do so primarily through the force of examples. As Joan Kopchak recently has noted, Kant once called example the go-kart of thinking. This description sounds especially quaint after Zizek, who makes example the turbojet of his thought. That he has written more than 35 books in 21 years demonstrates the speed with which Zizek thinks, but it is the speed with which he manages to find examples to illustrate even his most abstract philosophical points that most distinguishes his work. Through his rare gift for providing examples, Zizek has been able to reach more readers than any other philosopher living today. In each instance, however, he never sacrifices a historical perspective or philosophical argument in favor of a demand for present solutions. As one of the great analysts of what he has called the obscene ideological underground of our daily practices, he reminds us of the inevitability of political complicity, and in doing so, he has become one of our most cherished resources and one of our most significant allies in the struggle for a more just, because more thoughtful, world. Today's lecture is entitled, Why Only an Atheist Can Be a True Christian. Please help me welcome Slavoj Zizek to Princeton.
Thanks very much, first to all of you coming here, all the distinguished guests, and then really all of you. I'm honored to be here. Thanks to Ed, to his nice introduction, about which, nonetheless, I cannot restrain myself from making an oft-repeated bad taste joke. Namely, he pictured a certain image of me. You saw like these dead big words and so on. In my miserable presence, I feel a big gap between this noble image, some guy who wrote all the, and this, I wouldn't say piece of shit, but this nobody who is here. And in psychoanalysis, the whole psychoanalysis is in a way about this gap. Like, you are a father, but are you really a father? Every adolescent knows that his father is not really a father and so on. In psychoanalysis, we call this gap between your, let's call it symbolic title of social authority and your miserable real presence, symbolic castration. So thanks, Ed, for an experience of castration to open. That's what one expects from friends. Okay. Only one supplement to your list. I may disappoint you, but now I'm getting old enough and I'm more and more turning towards philosophy, Hegel, and so on. So maybe it's time to approach the big issues. Because of this, I would like just to give you the fundamental idea. People ask me, but you are card-carrying, emphatic atheist. Why all this fuss with Christianity? And I will, it may sound strange, but I will really talk about what the title of my talk says. So I will begin with a statement, allegedly, the legend says it, probably it didn't take place, that in 1633 Galileo Galilei muttered, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. After recanting before the Inquisition, after recanting his theory that the earth moves around the sun. He was not tortured. It was enough to take him on a tour and choke him the torturing devices. He wisely stepped back. Today, this phrase, "eppur si muove," is usually predominantly used to indicate that although someone who possesses true knowledge is forced to renounce it, this does not stop it from being true. This is the common sense use. No, you may say whatever you want, but things are the way they are. But I hope you notice that what makes this phrase so interesting is that it can also be used and I think this use is much more interesting, in the exactly opposite sense, to assert, let's call it, deeper symbolic truth of something which is literally not true. You make a statement, it's obviously false, but nonetheless, you know, one of the ways to put this is another Italian saying, se non è vero è ben trovato. Like, even if it's not true, in a deeper sense, the message is some, not literal but metaphoric truth. Like, incidentally, eppur si muove, this phrase itself, which probably false as a historical fact about Galileo's life, is true as a designation probably of Galileo's subjective position, when he was forced to renounce his views. In this sense, a materialist can say that, although he knows that there is no God, the idea of a God nonetheless still moves him. This doesn't mean anything mystical that he secretly believes or whatever, but nonetheless that even if I know it's true, there is the problem of how this idea, I don't know, evokes emotions, works, and so on and so on. So this is what I want to look at. I would like to begin with the well-known conservative idea, borrowed allegedly from Dostoevsky, which, so they claim, is especially true today for our liberal hedonist times. You know, if there is no God, then everything is permitted. From millions killed in gulags up to animal sex and gay marriages, here is where we end if we deny all transcendent authority which poses some unsurpassable limit to human endeavors. Without such limits, so the story goes, there is no obstacle to exploit one's neighbors ruthlessly, to use them as tools for profit and pleasure, to enslave and humiliate them, to kill them in millions. All that separates us from this ultimate moral vacuum are, in the absence of some transcendent limit, temporary and non-obligatory paragraphs of a kind of a pact among wolves, egotist self-imposed limitations in the interest of one's survival. I want to problematize this self-evidence. First, it's another eppur si muove, or se non è vero è ben trovato. Everyone reports this as Dostoevsky says it allegedly in Brothers Karamazov. Of course, Dostoevsky never says this, no? As long as I was able to establish the first one who says this, if there is no God, then everything is permitted, and attributed to Dostoevsky was Sartre in his letter Elle Néant. But the first thing one cannot help noticing is that Jacques Lacan's well-known critical inversion of this dictum. Lacan claims if there is no God, then everything is prohibited. This reversal is much more appropriate to describe the universe of atheist liberal hedonists. They dedicate their life to the pursuit of pleasures, but since there is no external authority which would guarantee them a space for this pursuit, they get entangled into a thick network of self-imposed politically correct regulations, as if a superego, much more severe than that of the traditional morality, is controlling them. They get obsessed by the idea that, in pursuing their pleasures, they may humiliate or violate others' space. So they regulate their behavior with detailed prescriptions of how to avoid harassing others, not to mention the no less complex regulations